President Trump says he plans to name a Supreme Court nominee on July 9th. That's according to remarks he made aboard Air Force One Friday while traveling to his golf club in New Jersey. Mr. Trump also said he's down to 5 finalists for the opening, including 2 women. Advocacy groups are treating the vacancy created by Justice Anthony Kennedy's retirement as a critical moment for the future of abortion rights. During an interview with Fox Business, President Trump discussed how he would approach this topic with his nominee.
Are you going to ask your nominees beforehand how they might vote on Roe versus Wade?
Well, that's a big one, and probably not. They're all saying, don't do that, you don't do that, you shouldn't do that. But I'm putting conservative people on, and I'm very proud of Neil Gorsuch. He has been outstanding. His opinions are, is so well written, so brilliant. And I'm going to try and do something like that, but I don't think I'm going to be so specific.
Joining us now from Boston is Michael Graham. He's a CBSN political contributor, Boston Herald columnist, and politics editor for NHJournal.com. Michael, you are a busy man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it was a big announcement today from the president on Friday about the search for a Supreme Court nominee. Based on what we've heard so far, what do you think the president is looking for in that next justice?
I think he's looking to keep the people happy that he made happy with Judge Gorsuch. And there's an opportunity here. People say that President Trump is incapable of education. He just does it his way, whether the results are good or bad. But I wonder if he didn't learn something from the Gorsuch process. He picked a list before the election to let social conservatives, 70% of whom said that the court was a very important issue to them. He let them know, I'm going to work off this list. He went with that list. He let his team kind of guide it through, and he got a lot of great feedback. And I wonder if he didn't see that and go, you know what, we got this one right. I'm going to do the same thing. And the fact that he's reduced that list reportedly down to 5 people shows that this was already on his mind and his team was ready to go. If he lets his team do the job, good things can happen for President Trump. Now we'll just see if he can stay off Twitter.
I doubt that.
Exactly.
We heard from the president about what he said regarding Roe versus Wade.
Right.
How much of a litmus test do you think that issue is going to be?
Well, the trick is for everybody to say there is no litmus test. President Obama said he didn't have a litmus test. President Trump is saying it. And, of course, there is a litmus test. There's no way that President Trump is going to appoint someone who is openly pro-choice, just as President Obama was never going to support someone who was openly pro-life. So that's just where we are. The courts have, alas, become yet another branch of our politics as opposed to our government. But, it's interesting. The approach from the right makes this issue easier to work out because their claim is that what they want are people who follow the text of the Constitution and what it originally meant. And, of course, the Constitution never dealt with an issue like abortion or privacy in this manner. And so if you pick people who are going to stick close to the law, you're going to end up with conservative outcomes, as opposed to the left, which really says they think that the Constitution should be kind of dynamic. It should change with the times, and it should be used as a tool to bring about social justice. And so, therefore, you've got to have positions because you're going for an outcome, as opposed to conservatives who say, look, just give us someone who'll stick with the process. The outcomes will take care of itself.
Now, Democrats, of course, are likely to oppose whoever the president nominates. But what about Republicans? Which moderate Republicans do you think the president will really have to convince in order to push this nomination through?
That's interesting. The names that always come up are Alaska's Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins of Maine. Senator McCain, because of his personal health issues, it's a real question about how that's going to work out. But to me, the interesting thing is Democrats. And I wrote about this for CBSN. So you've got a bunch of red state Democrats who, are trying to get reelected this November. The argument against them is they're really closet liberals. They're with the Washington liberals. They come home and they talk a good game about being swing voters and open-minded, but they're liberals. Now they're going to have the ultimate litmus test for them. Are you going to back a conservative for the Supreme Court? If they don't, they're confirming everything their opponent says about them right before the November election. I used to run campaigns. I would hate to be Claire McCaskill or Joe Manchin on a vote like this. At the same time, if they go with the president, and of course 3 did, Heitkamp, Manchin, and Donnelly of Indiana, if they go with the president on the even election, they're going to really anger their base. And this election is shaping up to be a base versus base election, the kind of election where swing voters kind of stay home and the two teams, their core voters, kind of pour out. You don't want to be a Democrat who tells your energized, impeach Trump base, you know what, I'm going to vote with the president on this one. Don't worry about it. They don't want to hear that, as we saw in New York City in the election of Congressman, soon-to-be former Congressman Crowley.
And that's going to be your topic for your column out Monday, correct?
Yes, is that where is the line? You know, it's tricky to keep your base energized, but without doing things that set people off. And I think that this incident at the restaurant, the Red Hen, restaurant incident where Sarah Huckabee Sanders was disinvited to eat there, I think it's having a lot more impact on voters than maybe we in the media think. And the reason is they can imagine themselves sitting in a restaurant and then all this crazy political stuff, and suddenly whatever their position, they're in trouble. They have to answer for their position. They're uncomfortable. They're embarrassed. And if they get a perception that the angry left is so angry that no space will be safe, that they're going to get embarrassed dropping their kid off at school or at work, they just don't want to be a part of that. And that might cause some voters who would have stayed home or maybe even thought about voting Democrat, they may say, you know what, I'm going to try to keep some more Republicans in place because that extremism, that tension is so off-putting, I'm afraid of them. Fear is a motivator for votes, not happy. Happy does not motivate votes. It motivates purring and you stay home and you watch TV. Fear gets people to go out and vote. Will leaning right swing voters be afraid of the extremism of the left? That's the difficult path that Democrats have to navigate headed to November.
These elections are getting more and more complicated. Now,
yes, they are.
Talking about what's happening inside the White House, of course, there are reports that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly might be leaving soon. What impact would that have at the White House?
You know, it's fascinating. 6 months ago, if you asked me that question, I would have said, oh, this is terrible. We got to have General Kelly there so he can do whatever he's doing, cattle prod or something to calm President Trump down. President Trump is Trump Unleashed. He's never Bruce Banner. He's always the Hulk. And so if Kelly can't stop him, if he can't keep him off the Twitter, if he can't keep him from getting involved in stuff and bashing away at the FBI investigation in a counterproductive way, if he can't slow down things like the meeting. I thought the meeting with North Korea, when you look at it afterwards, how little America got, how much North Korea got, you wonder if General Kelly had more influence, if that might have gone differently. The same thing with this new meeting with Russia. If General Kelly can't act as a choke on some of the exuberance of President Trump, I would argue that right now we already have a different chief of staff, and it's Donald Trump.
Now, in terms of his vice president, Mike Pence, of course, just returned from Guatemala, where he met with leaders of several Latin American countries. This comes amid a crisis of immigration at the border. And, of course, our administration is saying that the countries where a lot of these people are coming from in Central America need to change things to quell the influx of people that are coming from these countries. What effect did Pence's visit have at all, if any?
Yeah, I think it had very little. And this is one thing that I would ask border security people to think about. You know, Americans hate foreign aid. They hate the idea of it, even though it's a very small percentage of our budget. But we just don't like messing with other people's stuff, generally speaking, as Americans, a few glaring exceptions. But this might be a situation where you might want to think about, can you use economic power to improve things in those three countries where so many Central Americans are coming from to help resolve the tension at the border? Mike Pence had a limited palette to draw from. He couldn't really say, hey, look, if you'll do something, we'll do some foreign investment. We'll help we'll build some schools, we'll do a trade deal with you. America's not in that spot. This president's not in that spot. And that might be truly counterproductive. You wonder if there's not a grand bargain to be made with those countries of, look, if you can bring your numbers down to a certain level, then we'll turn around and give you some favorable trade or spend some money. But with this president and his approach on immigration right now, Vice President Pence certainly did not have that tool in his toolbox.
So do you think it was mostly optics that Vice President Pence was down there?
I think it was even less than that. What are you going to do? These are the people who are misgoverning their nation so poorly that desperate parents are willing to walk hundreds of miles with their young children just to get away. So, if they had a way to fix it, they probably would. You've got a lot of mismanagement, and they've got their own problems. We certainly can't fix them simply by telling them, you guys straighten up. That's not going to do it.
Back to the midterm elections. How out of the box are these elections going to be? Because this is a time where people on their left are calling on Americans to confront members of the administration if they see them. Now, with the vacancy on the Supreme Court, that throws a whole other angle to these midterms. How unprecedented are these elections, considering the issues that are now at play?
I try to remind myself that few things are unprecedented. I mean, think about the turmoil back in 1968, where you had multiple assassinations and riots in the streets. I mean, things have been bad and crazy in the past, but this is going to be an interesting ride. And I think there are two things going on. One you mentioned, you're absolutely right. This because Democrats can't stop the Republicans from putting in a Supreme Court nominee because Harry Reid blew up the rules in 2013, because the Democrats themselves voted to blow up those rules. There's not a lot they can do. That's just going to leave their base frustrated. So what if you can't act? What do? You yell, you scream, you protest. Maybe you are rude to people. The other thing to look at is ICE. I think this surge for people to say we want to abolish ICE, you're seeing this, it went from a fringe notion to mainstream just in the last 2 weeks. That's also problematic, because if you want to get kind of Trump-leaning voters who are on the fence about voting really energized, tell them that you're going to shut down ICE. In their mind, no matter how you explain it, that sounds like open borders. That sounds like sanctuary country. And so that's another area that's going to generate a lot of emotion. So two supercharged batteries to create a lot of passion heading into an election. Strap yourselves in. It's going to be a wild ride.
Indeed it will. Now, in terms of this weekend, the president is, of course, in New Jersey. What do we know about what's on his agenda?
Well, there's golf on his agenda. And there's something that I learned prepping for this appearance. He has not been back to his favorite golf spot there in northern New Jersey this year. You know, there's a lot of talk about how last year he spent so much time there, and he told people that's the place he was really the most comfortable. And there's some grousing that, you know, come on, you need to get back to work. And I happen to have been one of those grousers back then. But this is the first time he's been there this year. He probably thinks, given all the stuff that's happened, North Korea, meeting up with Russia, the Supreme Court, that he's entitled to a vacation. I would suspect will be some vacay time. But anytime Donald Trump has access to his cell phone, anything can happen. So unless they set up these cellular jamming towers outside the golf course, which I recommend, who knows what's going to happen while he's in New Jersey.
I'm sure he'll be keeping us all busy, and he might even be meeting with potential nominees for the Supreme Court vacancy. Right. I wonder what you think the timing of this vacancy and Justice Kennedy's decision to retire says about Justice Kennedy's opinion of President Trump, considering he's giving him this gift.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to our first question. President Trump really followed the path on Gorsuch. He kind of did everything very traditionally. And I think that gave Justice Kennedy the confidence that if he left, that this competent team would be there. He had seen the list. The list is public, so he saw the other names. He must have decided it was a pretty decent list. So that opened it up for him. Something else that gets frequently forgotten, because Kennedy was so all over the map on particularly social issue rulings, people forget he was appointed by Ronald Reagan. He really had been a pretty traditional Republican up until his appointment. And part of what's happened is that the country has moved more right, while Kennedy's kind of stayed where he was center right. But he was always a Republican. He's got a Republican president. They've got a pretty good team. Got a good list of justices. He's 81 years old. I don't know that I would want to be deciding the most important aspects of life and doing all that homework when I'm 81. It seems like he made a pretty smart decision.
And of course, just with Justice Gorsuch's appointment, he worked with Justice Kennedy in the past. So perhaps that sent a signal to Justice Kennedy that he might be comfortable with the president's next pick for the Supreme Court. So much to talk about. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us, Michael Graham in Boston. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.